Here's a picture of towers in, I assume, in China, but either way, Chinese run or managed in some way. And this Twitter user says, China proves communism works with these colossal towers with the hammer and sickle on them. And I must say, I rather like the graphic design here with the sort of overlapping layers of white with the red at the top. Very stark color contrast, but not a big fan of the hammer and sickle logo, a logo that has killed more people than any other. Not the logo itself, you understand, but the ideology it represents. The community notes, which frankly are fantastic. They are the best feature Twitter has ever added. I think that's fair to say. Says, this is the Shimao Cross Strait Plaza, which was designed by US architect Gensler and developed, which is not an American name, it's a German name, and developed by for-profit real estate group Shimao Group Holdings Limited for $690 million. It has a 5-star Conrad Hotel, which is part of Hilton Worldwide. It's a capitalist venture, like everything worthwhile on this planet, in the realm of big projects. So it goes without saying, I think. At this point, you guys are quite well aware. But let me lay out something I've been thinking about recently. I have a conception of society which sort of builds up the layers to explain why capitalism is better. Or that wasn't the original intention, but it does do it. Every society has a concept of merit. That's where everything starts. It's what is useful to the society, to each individual, and it's not set in stone, but it's established through interactions. They then have to establish a merit gradient. So forces, it's social forces and professional forces and whatever else in society to incentivize behavior that is meritorious and disincentivize behavior that's unmeritorious or anti-meritorious or demeritorious. That's the second tier of any society. The third tier is when you establish, if you get an economy essentially from that. You establish things like property ownership and contract enforcement, and you can have a society, an economy in your society. This is where communism slips up. Not at that stage, no. At the previous stage. Because communism is not just an alternative form of economy. Communism rejects the notion of the merit hierarchy in total. Or in some cases, it establishes a totally different definition of merit, which is not concomitant with evolutionary benefit. And enforces that. And it's not an alternative to capitalism. It's a rejection of the goal of capitalism, even at its best. But I think I've said all this before. This sort of construction of these 3 tiers and a bunch of other sort of explanations beyond that was part of a thought I was having that I may at some point turn into a more structured explanation. But something I was thinking about. Found out all the proponents are meritless fucks. Indeed, and that is notable. The idea that work, arduous toil is undesirable, is reasonable. But the whole reason it's undesirable to us is because it uses energy, and energy is limited. And so all life in the universe is prone to try to use as little energy as it can to do what it needs to do. So having lazy people in society is beneficial because they will find ways to make work more efficient. At best. But the misfiring of that tendency is trying to find ways to make work just go away entirely, regardless what needs to be done. And the height of insanity of the lazy was to imagine an ideology where all the reasons that we work have been wished away by some people will just. Now, I was supposed to in Kabbalah about that, the idea of people will just. If your ideology relies on people will just, no, people have never just. They will never do that. They will do something you don't expect. They will react to your system in such a way as to escape it in many cases. So, no. It doesn't. There's so many different ways that I can approach why communism in its various forms doesn't work. Anyway, China is much less socialist, in my somewhat limited understanding, than Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union were. More so Soviet Union. With Soviet Union, I believe it was mostly socialist interior, that they actually prevented capitalistic trade internally. China doesn't. China is much more like Nazi Germany, where they are socialist in name only. But they have all the bad, a lot of the bad aspects of socialism, but not really the economic aspects. Only the tyranny aspect, only the collectivist aspect of socialism, but not so much the economic. I believe, as I understand it, in China, once you're of a certain class, once you're above a certain level of attainment in society, then you're allowed to engage in capitalism. It's not a hard and fast thing, but that appears to be how it is. There's loads of capitalistic activity in China, just not outside the cities, and not any significant amount at low levels. Outside the cities, it is essentially feudalism. Inside the cities, it is like highly corrupt, government centralized, cronyistic, and national socialist capitalism, which isn't properly capitalism at all. But as I said before, collectivism and authoritarianism, especially in combination, can boost a nation's value in the short term. And I think that's what we're seeing with China. It's being helped along significantly by the fact that China has managed to corrupt a bunch of US officials at the same time, which has boosted, Bill Clinton making them, preferred trading partner or whatever it was. Whether that was direct corruption or just because he saw the opportunity of a bunch of basically slaves doing manufacturing, either way, it's the same effect. And they certainly have. It seems like they've been corrupting politicians across the Western world. That combination of factors, the aggressive control, a command economy, plus manipulation of every other country in the world stage with the money they get from offering most of their people as a slave class to the rest of the world. That is the way that you can actually make collectivism and totalitarianism work. But it doesn't last, I don't think. And they have for a long time, possibly since they started engaging in this, been a paper tiger in that if you nudge just a few elements of their system, take away one or two bricks, or maybe just one brick of this, which are quite tenuous, then it won't be able to survive. If they can no longer sell manufacturing at the cheap costs they've been selling it at, they will be in trouble. If they can no longer continue inflating their housing bubble by building fake houses across the country, they will be in trouble. And they've got a lot of other problems too. Demographic squeeze, water is a big issue there, and the Three Gorges Dam as well, which could collapse at any time, destroying like a third of their industrial capacity. They're in a bad state, but they absolutely deserve it. Make no mistake. They absolutely deserve it. They are utter shits on the world stage. If you're looking for a villain in the world right now, there it is. Well, not the only one, but there it is. Yes, here we go. Everyone will not just. And this, I agree with this almost entirely. I feel like it's very slightly wrong, but mostly correct. So they say, if your solution to some problem relies on if everyone would just, then you do not have a solution. Everyone is not going to just. At no time in the history of the universe has everyone just, and they're not going to start now. The 20-teens Tumblr writing style, for everything else Tumblr got wrong in the 20-teens, and trust me, they got a lot wrong in the 20-teens, the audience there, not just the website, but the audience. For everything else they got wrong, the actual writing style, I kind of like it. It's, I don't know how to describe it. And I'm not even sure if I could characterize it, but I'm sure a lot of you know what I mean. Ronald says it's feminine. Yeah, possibly. But I don't think in a bad way. I think it's also where could you not comes from, which lasted pretty well. I don't know how many of you used it. But yes, it's probably more of a feminine thing, but I don't think it's a bad thing. Anyway. Yes, this is mostly true. I think, as I said, it's very applicable to your late teens, early 20s political radical, very applicable to them. It's extremely applicable to anyone who thinks of themselves as any kind of anarchist. Highly applicable to them. But once you get a little more sophisticated than that in politics, some assertions of everyone will just are true. The thing is that if your ideology relies on an assertion of everyone will just that is not observable in reality at present, that's ridiculous. And I suspect that's what they're implying. But sometimes everyone will just. In, for example, our societies, everyone will just become aware of issues, gradually be turned off by the current establishment, demand a change, and then everyone will just vote for Donald Trump. You can do it properly with this kind of thing, but I agree with what I think they're trying to imply, that most of the time, almost every time, and if your ideology relies on it when it's not overtly obvious, then it's nonsense. But I think my general conception of how society works and changes over the last few years that I've been spouting for at least 4 years is being, at least in some contexts, generally proven true.